Look at your phone right now. Open your banking app and stare at the balance. Whatever number is sitting on that screen, whether it makes you smile with relief or makes you want to throw your phone into the nearest ocean, that number is what you consider wealth. It's an abstract digital concept stored on a server somewhere, a sequence of ones and zeros that dictates where you can live, what you can eat, and how much stress you carry in your shoulders. But for 99.9% of human history, wealth wasn't a number. It wasn't gold. It wasn't even property. Before the invention of money, before the first coin was ever minted, before anyone ever conceptualized the idea of owning a piece of land, what did it actually mean to be rich? What was it like to be the ancient equivalent of a billionaire when the world was mostly ice, dirt, and apex predators? The answer to that question changes everything we think we know about inequality, power, and human nature. If you go back 50,000 years, your ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They lived in small, highly mobile, nomadic bands of maybe 30 to 50 people. In this environment, hoarding physical objects was not just frowned upon, it was literally a death sentence. If you accumulate too much stuff, too many heavy furs, too many stone tools, too much dried meat, you simply cannot carry it when the herd you are tracking moves to new grazing grounds. If you can't move quickly, you starve. It is a brutal, mathematical reality of the Pleistocene epoch. Because of this intense evolutionary pressure, early human societies were fiercely, almost violently egalitarian. If a hunter killed a massive woolly mammoth, he didn't keep all the meat for himself and his immediate family. He shared it with the entire band. But he didn't just share it out of the goodness of his heart. He shared it because the social rules of the group demanded it. In fact, many modern hunter-gatherer groups that still exist today, like the San people of the Kalahari Desert, explicitly practice something anthropologists call insulting the meat. When a hunter brings back a massive, life-saving kill, everyone in the camp mocks him. They tell him the meat is stringy, that the animal is too small, that he barely did any work. They do this intentionally to keep his ego in check. Nobody is allowed to act superior. If a hunter starts acting arrogant, he risks being ostracized, and in the ancient world, being exiled from the group was a guaranteed death sentence. So, in a world where you couldn't own more than you could carry, and where society aggressively prevented anyone from acting superior, how could anyone possibly be wealthy? Let me know in the comments if you could survive in a society where nobody was allowed to own more than what they could carry. I don't think most of us could last a week without Amazon Prime. In the deep past, before agriculture, wealth was purely biological and social. Wealth was having a high percentage of body fat to survive the lean winter months. Wealth was being exceptionally skilled at knapping flint into razor-sharp spearheads. But most importantly, wealth was social credit. Think of it like an ancient invisible ledger. If you shared food generously when you were successful, others would remember that and feed you when you were starving or injured. You didn't store your wealth in a bank vault. You stored it in the bellies of your friends and neighbors. Your generosity was your insurance policy. The richest man in the tribe wasn't the one who had the most. He was the one who gave the most away. But then, the twist happened. The timeline of human equality is not as clean as we like to think. Something broke the system, long before the first farm was ever planted. Archaeologists call it the Sungir Burials. In 1955, near Moscow, archaeologists were excavating a site from the Upper Paleolithic era, dating back roughly 28,000 years. Deep in the permafrost, they uncovered a grave containing the remains of an older man and 2 children. But it wasn't the skeletal remains that shocked the scientific world. It was what they were wearing. The bodies in the Sungir grave were absolutely covered in intricately carved mammoth ivory beads. And I don't mean a few dozen. There were over 13,000 individual beads. Think about the sheer logistics of that for a second. Carving a single mammoth ivory bead with primitive stone tools takes an experienced craftsman about 1 hour. That grave contained over 13,000 hours of manual labor. If someone worked 40 hours a week, purely carving beads, it would take them over 6 years to make what was in that single grave. This wasn't just a burial. This was an astronomical flex of resources. This was the ancient equivalent of being buried in a solid gold Ferrari while your neighbors watched. It meant that someone or some group of people was able to command the labor of others to produce thousands of hours of purely decorative, non-functional items. But the most mind-bending, paradigm-shifting part of the discovery? The two children in the grave, a boy and a girl, were much too young to have earned those beads through heroic hunting, wise leadership, or incredible flint-knapping skills. They were children. They didn't earn that wealth. They were born into it. This is the oldest definitive proof of inherited wealth in human history. Even during the peak of the Ice Age, a full 15,000 years before the invention of farming and permanent settlements, the 1% already existed. If this completely changes how you view ancient humans, hit the like button. Most people are taught that inequality started with modern civilization, but the truth is, the desire for status runs much, much deeper in our DNA. So what was life actually like for these ancient, prehistoric elites? In short, it was physically superior in almost every conceivable way, and we know this for a fact because of what happened next. Around 10,000 years ago, humanity made a devil's bargain. We invented agriculture. We stopped chasing wild herds and gathering wild berries, and we started planting wheat, barley, and rice. We traded the highly varied, incredibly nutritious diet of the nomadic hunter-gatherer for the highly storable, highly caloric, but nutritionally poor diet of farmed grain. For the average ancient human, the peasant class, the agricultural revolution was an absolute biological disaster. When anthropologists examine the skeletons from early farming communities, the results are horrifying. The average height of humans plummeted by several inches. The skeletons show massive rates of tooth decay from the sugary carbohydrates in grain. They show severe bone lesions from malnutrition, anemia, and the back-breaking repetitive labor of grinding grain on stone all day long. Early farmers lived shorter, sicker, more painful lives than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. But the rich? The rich were doing spectacularly well. With the invention of agriculture came the invention of the surplus. For the first time in history, humans could produce more food than they could eat in a day, and they could store it in a silo for years. And whoever controlled the silo controlled the society. For the ancient elite, wealth no longer meant social credit, it meant absolute control over calories, and with that control came access to the ultimate luxury, meat. While the peasants broke their backs eating nothing but wheat porridge, the elite were eating deer, boar, and prime cuts of livestock. The physical difference between the classes became so extreme that it was written in their bones. Skeletons of ancient royalty and high-status individuals from early civilizations show that they were significantly taller than the commoners who lived right outside their palace walls. They had significantly better teeth. They didn't have the crushed spinal columns and bone deformities caused by endless manual labor. They lived entirely different biological realities. Do you think you would have been part of the elite ruling class or the struggling peasant class back then? Be brutally honest with yourself in the comments below. But this new agricultural wealth came with a profound, irreversible psychological shift. Remember, for hundreds of thousands of years, wealth was social credit stored in your neighbor's belly. It was safe because the group survived together. But agricultural wealth was physical. It was grain stored in a building, and when wealth can be physically stored in one location, it can be physically stolen. This realization changed the architecture of human existence. This is the exact moment in history when massive stone walls were built around cities. This is when the first standing armies were invented. The entire structure of early modern society, laws, borders, military forces, police, was born specifically to protect the stored wealth of the tiny elite class from the starving masses outside and from rival elites in neighboring cities. We completely traded a world where wealth meant the collective survival of the group for a world where wealth meant the survival of the individual, often at the direct expense of the group. We traded an invisible ledger of generosity for a physical ledger of debt and taxation. If you want to keep exploring the weird, hidden history of human biology and how our ancient past still dictates our modern lives, hit subscribe. we've got a lot more deep history to uncover. So, the next time you unlock your phone and check that banking app, or the next time you feel that pit of anxiety about a car payment or a mortgage, take a deep breath and remember the mammoth ivory beads of Sungir. We may have swapped carved bone and stored grain for digital numbers on a glowing screen, but the core biological impulse to hoard resources, to display our status, and to physically separate ourselves from the crowd, that instinct is older than the ice. It is carved deep into our evolutionary history, and whether we like it or not, it's not going anywhere.